My parents erased my name from the wedding list. No fight, no warning, just gone. When I asked why Dad said it's her day, Maddie, you'll only cause trouble, I laughed, pretending it didn't sting. But that night, I sat in the dark, realizing it wasn't about the wedding. It was about belonging. I'd spent my whole life fixing their messes, making myself small enough to fit their version of family. And in the end, they decided. Even my silence didn't fit. That was the moment I stopped trying to belong. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Portland always looked gray in June, not the cinematic, misty gray you see in travel blogs. This was the kind that settled into your bones heavy and cold. That morning, the air outside my apartment felt damp, the kind of damp that made everything stick. I was halfway through a design proposal for a client in Seattle when my phone buzzed. It was an old family friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Maddie, are you coming to Olivia's wedding? I saw the guest list. It looks insane. I froze. My sister's wedding. The one Mom had been gushing about for months. I hadn't heard a word about a guest list. I opened my laptop, fingers stiff. Gmail family group chat, the Pierce family thread that had been buzzing with flower photos and Pinterest boards for weeks. The latest message from Mom, finalized guest list attached, so excited, had a PDF attachment. I clicked it open, scrolling down name after name, cousins, family friends, even Mrs. Glenn, our old babysitter. My name wasn't there. I blinked, scrolled back up, then down again. Maybe they'd used my full name, Madeline Grace Pierce. Or just Maddie. Nothing. I checked the guest list twice, 3 times, my stomach tightening. For a second, I told myself it was a mistake. Mom was forgetful. She probably assumed Dad had added me. I called her. She picked up on the second ring, her voice soft and strained like she'd been waiting for this. Sweetheart, hi. Everything okay? Hey, Mom, I said, keeping my tone even. I just saw the guest list. I think my name was left off by accident. There was a pause, one of those silences where you can almost hear someone decide what kind of lie to tell. Oh, honey, she said finally, this is Olivia's day. She really wants things calm, no tension, no drama. You understand, right? My grip tightened on the phone. You're saying I'm not invited because I'm dramatic. She sighed. A patient, motherly sound that used to make me feel guilty as a kid. It's not like that. It's just, well, you two haven't exactly gotten along lately. I don't want anything ruining her happiness. Her happiness. I repeated the words flat. Got it. Please don't make this about you, she added quickly. It's her moment, Maddie. Before I could answer, she was already talking about centerpieces and seating charts, her voice fading into a flurry of logistics. I hung up before she finished. My hands shook when I called Dad. He answered on the first ring. Hey, kiddo, he said too casually. Dad, did you know I wasn't invited to Olivia's wedding? A pause, then evenly. It's her day, Maddie. You'll only cause trouble. There was no anger in his voice, no emotion at all. Just the quiet, clipped tone of a man who didn't want to be part of the conversation. Trouble, I repeated softly. Right. He exhaled like he was relieved I didn't argue. You know how your sister is. Sensitive. Let's not make this a big thing. I stared at the rain streaking down my window. No, Dad? I said quietly. Let's not. When the call ended, the apartment fell silent, except for the faint hum of my computer. The guest list still glowed on the screen, mocking me. I leaned closer, rereading every name. The Johnsons, the Palmers people. I hadn't spoken to since high school, and yet somehow they all made the cut. Everyone except me. I closed the laptop and sat there staring at the grain of my wooden desk, at the half-finished sketches pinned on the wall. I'd built a life here, a quiet one. No chaos, no outbursts, just work and routine, and the illusion that distance could turn neglect into peace. Outside, the rain thickened into a steady drizzle, tapping against the window like static. I reached for my phone again, scrolled through old texts. Mom reminding me to be supportive. Olivia sending heart emojis when she needed money for rent. I'd stopped replying months ago after realizing every conversation ended the same way, with me giving and them taking. I opened the Pierce family group chat. Photos of Olivia's engagement party filled the feed. White roses, champagne flutes, captions about new beginnings. I hovered over the leave group option for a moment, then pressed it. The app asked, "Are you sure you want to leave?" Yes, I whispered. Then I blocked their accounts one by one. Mom, Dad, Olivia. The silence that followed was immediate and strangely peaceful. I leaned back, exhaled, and for a moment it felt like something inside me unclenched. The kind of release that comes not from forgiveness, but from exhaustion. On my desk, a small picture frame caught my eye. It was the last photo we'd taken together. Christmas Eve 3 years ago. Olivia front and center, smiling like she owned the room. I was standing at the edge, half cut off, holding a wine glass no one noticed. I picked up the frame and turned it face down. It's funny, I said to no one. You can disappear from your own family without them even realizing you're gone. I closed my laptop, the glow fading from the room. For a few seconds, the reflection of the blue light lingered on my face, part sadness, part relief. Like someone else had hit delete for me. Outside, the rain fell harder, steady and rhythmic, washing the city clean. I watched it until the sound blurred into background noise, until even my own thoughts went quiet. The rain hadn't stopped all day. It moved across the city in sheets, sliding down the windows of my apartment, blurring the view of downtown Portland into a smear of silver lights. I sat cross-legged on the rug in front of the fireplace, a half-empty glass of Cabernet beside me. An old box of photos spread open on the floor. It wasn't nostalgia that made me open it. Maybe I just wanted to remember a version of my family that didn't hurt to think about. The first photo on top was faded, the corners curling from years of being handled. Olivia was 6. I was 11. We were in Dad's workshop, the one behind the old house on Maple Street. The smell of varnish and sawdust used to cling to our clothes for days. I remembered that afternoon. Olivia had grabbed one of Dad's paint cans and tipped it over the workbench, splattering green all over the floor. Dad laughed like it was the most adorable thing in the world. Look at that, he'd said, ruffling her hair. My little artist. I was kneeling beside her with a rag scrubbing paint off the wood, while Mom called from the kitchen to watch the mess. Dad didn't even notice. He was too busy filming Olivia on his old camcorder, saying one day you'll design something incredible. I smiled at the memory, but it hurt on the way out. The next photo was of my high school graduation. I was 17, clutching my diploma hair frizzy from humidity. Olivia stood beside me in her cheer uniform, flashing a bigger smile than I did. A week after that picture was taken, I'd gotten my scholarship letter from Oregon State. 4 years full ride for architecture. Mom had cried when she heard, but not for the reason I hoped. That night, she sat me down at the kitchen table, hands folded over mine. Sweetheart, you know your sister didn't get into any of her schools, she said softly. She's been so fragile lately. Maybe you could share part of your scholarship fund. Just a little to help her start somewhere smaller. Mom, it doesn't work like that, I'd said, laughing awkwardly. I'm not asking for all of it, she pressed. Just enough for her tuition. You'll still be fine. You always land on your feet. Dad had been silent, pretending to read the paper. Olivia hovered behind Mom, eyes red lip, trembling just enough to make me feel guilty. I remembered, agreeing, my voice small. Okay, just this once. That phrase, just this once, became a family tradition. The rain hit harder against the windows. I reached for another photo, one from my late 20s. Olivia and I at a cafe, downtown, coffee cups between us. She'd called that day crying about her dream project, a boutique studio she wanted to open but couldn't because her credit was ruined from unpaid cards. You could help me, Maddie, she'd said, gripping my hand across the table. You're so good with this stuff. Just sign as co-owner for the lease. I'll handle everything. I'd hesitated, told her I wasn't sure. She cried again, and then Mom called later that night, her tone rehearsed. Olivia's finally serious about something. Don't crush her spirit. You've always been the reliable one. Reliable. I'd heard that word my whole life. It sounded like a compliment but felt like a chain. So I signed. 8 months later, the studio was bankrupt. Olivia disappeared to California with a new boyfriend. I was left with $40,000 in debt and a credit score that took years to rebuild. When I'd called Mom crying, she'd said gently, Honey, she didn't mean for it to happen. You're stronger than she is. You'll bounce back. I had, but not the way she meant. Now, sitting in the dim glow of the fire, I laid the photos, side by side. The paint-splattered workshop, the graduation, the cafe. It was like watching a pattern unfold, her chaos. My cleanup. Her applause, my silence. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. The air smelled of rain and wet concrete. I pulled my notebook from the coffee table and opened to a clean page. The ink from my pen spread quickly across the paper. June 15th. Officially an outsider. The words looked small, but they felt final. I set the notebook down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For years, I'd mistaken usefulness for love. They called me dependable, sensible, grounded, as if those were traits of affection, not tools of convenience. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. The apartment was still except for the crackle of the fire. I let my eyes wander to the framed wedding photo hanging above the fireplace. My parents in 1986. Mom in lace sleeves. Dad in a rented tux, smiling like the world was theirs. I got up, walked over, and traced my finger along the edge of the frame. In the photo, Olivia wasn't even born yet, and somehow I could already feel her shadow. Happy day for them, I murmured. And my role's always been the same. Holding the backdrop, steady. The reflection of the flames shimmered over the glass, distorting their faces. I stood there for a moment longer, then turned away, the firelight flickering behind me as the rain softened outside. The call came 3 days later. Mom's voice was syrupy, sweet, too careful, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "Maddie, sweetheart, why don't you come by for dinner, just the three of us? It's been too long." I almost said no. Every instinct told me it was a setup, another performance where I'd play the quiet, reasonable daughter while they pretended nothing was wrong. But some small, stupid part of me still hoped for something real. So I said yes. The Pierce house sat 30 minutes outside Portland, near a stretch of highway lined with wildflowers and empty billboards. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the porch light was already on, glowing like a stage spotlight. The front door opened before I even knocked. "Sweetheart," Mom said, smiling too wide. She smelled like her favorite perfume, vanilla and nerves. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." Inside, everything looked exactly the same and completely wrong. The walls had been repainted a pale yellow, the same color as the house we grew up in, but every picture on them was new. Olivia, in a graduation gown. Olivia holding a microphone at some charity event. Olivia, with Ethan, at a vineyard in Napa. My own photos were gone. The dining room glowed with soft light from the chandelier Dad had restored years ago. The table was set for 3 candles burning low wine, already poured. No place card for Olivia. "Where's Liv?" I asked, shrugging off my coat. Mom's voice floated from the kitchen. "Busy with final fittings. You know how brides are." I didn't. Dad sat at the end of the table, reading something on his phone. "Hey, kiddo," he said without looking up. "You look good." "Thanks." I took the seat across from him. The air smelled like roasted meat and rosemary. The kind of meal Mom only made for company. She joined us with a practiced flourish, setting down a platter of pork tenderloin glazed to perfection. "Let's eat before it gets cold," she said, cheerful, mechanical. For the first few minutes, we just listened to the clink of silverware and the hum of the fridge. The food was delicious, but I couldn't taste a thing. Finally, Mom broke the silence. "So how's work?" "Busy," I said. "Finishing a renovation downtown." "That's nice," she replied, the words tight. "Olivia told me Ethan's helping her design their new condo." "You two could have so much to talk about." I laughed softly. Doubtful. Her fork paused midair. "Madeline." "What?" She set it down with a sigh. "I invited you here to make peace. Olivia needs calm before the wedding. I need you to understand that." I stared at her. "You think I'm the reason she's not calm?" Her expression hardened. "You've always been so defensive." Dad looked up from his plate, trying to diffuse it. "Let's not do this, Maddie. Not tonight." I pushed my wineglass aside. "Do what exactly? Tell the truth." Mom's smile thinned. "You've had issues with your sister for years. I just don't want any drama before her big day. Mom, you erased me from her wedding like I'm some family embarrassment. There's no drama left to avoid." She didn't answer. Her eyes darted toward Dad, who suddenly found his napkin very interesting. The air in the room thickened. I glanced around. The framed photos, the flowers, the curated perfection, and realized every trace of me had been scrubbed out. There used to be a photo of all 4 of us on that wall. It was gone. In its place, Olivia and Ethan in matching white shirts holding champagne flutes. I swallowed hard. "You redecorated." Mom gave a brittle laugh. "Just freshened things up. Right, I said quietly. Freshened things up. She started talking about the caterer, the wedding colors, how they'd settled on blush and ivory because it felt timeless. I barely listened. My gaze kept wandering back to the blank space above the fireplace where our family portrait used to hang. It hit me then. She hadn't just removed my name from a list. She'd removed me from the narrative. When the meal ended, Mom excused herself and came back with a small ivory envelope. Here, she said, placing it beside my plate. Just so we can stay in touch about any details. You never know. I looked at it. My name wasn't on the front, just the family crest printed in gold foil. I opened it and pulled out a wedding invitation. Thick, elegant paper, embossed with roses. Olivia Pierce and Ethan Ward. No mention of with love from her family. No beloved sister. I set the envelope down, the edges of the card damp from my fingers. You really outdid yourself this time, I said softly. Mom's eyes flashed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Dad shifted in his chair. Maddie. No, it's fine, I interrupted, standing. Dinner was great. It helped me understand exactly where we stand. I picked up my coat, the chair legs scraping against the hardwood. Mom called after me, "Don't walk out angry." I turned at the doorway, my voice steady. I'm not angry. I'm just finally full. The front door clicked shut behind me. Outside, the air smelled like wet grass and honeysuckle. I stood there for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. The faint clink of wine glasses. The hum of conversation continuing as if I'd never been there. Through the dining room window, I could see the candles flickering the reflection of 3 wine glasses. Only 2 remained upright. A gust of wind swept across the porch, scattering wildflower petals over the steps. I walked toward my car, their soft rustle, the only sound following me into the night. A week passed before I heard her name again. The morning light hit the blinds in thin, pale lines slicing across the concrete floor of my office. I'd rented a small space on the 9th floor of a building in the Pearl District, a glass and steel box where the hum of traffic below mixed with the soft click of my keyboard. I was finalizing a client's floor plan when an article notification blinked on my screen. The power couple, Olivia Pierce and Ethan Ward. It was on the front page of a glossy lifestyle magazine. Olivia smiled in a white jumpsuit, her hand lifted just enough for the camera to catch the diamond ring. Ethan stood beside her, handsome, in the rehearsed, polished way of men who'd never had to earn attention. The caption read, "The man every woman dreams of marrying." My chest tightened. I scrolled down. There was Mom's comment beneath the article posted from her public Facebook. "So proud of my daughter. She's found her perfect match. Perfect." I pushed the laptop back, stood, and crossed to the window. From up here, the city looked distant, orderly. Tiny people, clean streets, symmetrical buildings. I'd built a career on designing structure, on making chaos behave. But families don't follow blueprints. The office phone buzzed, snapping me out of it. I didn't recognize the number. When I answered, Jenna's voice came through, brisk and breathless. "Maddie, you at work, yeah? What's going on?" She hesitated. I could hear the clatter of plates in the background. Probably the cafe she managed. "You've seen that article about your sister, right? Hard to miss. Then you should probably see this too." Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with an incoming video call from her. I sighed, switching screens. Her face appeared framed by string lights and espresso machines. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Ethan Ward isn't who everyone thinks he is." I frowned, meaning one of my co-workers used to intern at his firm. "Ward Communications. He's got a history, Maddie. There was an HR complaint a few years ago. They buried it." I felt my pulse pick up. "Buried it, how she left the company before it went anywhere. Non-disclosure agreement, payout, the usual." Jenna glanced around, lowered her voice. "I know it's not my business, but you should warn your sister." She wouldn't listen. Then maybe she'll listen to proof. A new message came through. I opened it. The photo was grainy, dimly lit, a bar somewhere downtown. Ethan sat at a corner table, leaning toward a woman with dark hair, his hand resting low on her waist. The timestamp was from last week. "Who's she?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Her name's Kelsey Tran. She worked for him at Ward Communications. The story goes they dated before he met your sister. Or maybe during." The words hung between us. "Jenna," I said slowly. "I can't. Maddie. I wouldn't show you this if I didn't think it mattered." I rubbed my temples. "She won't believe me. She'll think I'm jealous or trying to ruin her big moment. Maybe. But if something's off, you'll wish you'd said something." The call ended, leaving me with the photo open on my screen. Ethan's hand, the smirk, the familiarity of it. It didn't look like a mistake. It looked like a pattern. I closed my eyes, exhaled through my nose, and felt the old ache return. The one that comes from watching someone walk straight toward disaster and knowing they'll drag you into it when they fall. I stared at the photo one last time, then hit delete. The image vanished, but the unease stayed. I stood by the window again. Outside, the city glowed under a weak sun, traffic moving like veins through glass and concrete. Somewhere out there, Olivia was probably trying on another designer dress, smiling for photographers, rehearsing the fairy tale Mom had written for her. A part of me wanted to call her, to tell her what I'd seen, to remind her of the man who'd once bragged at dinner about firing an assistant for being too emotional. I wanted to ask if she even knew what kind of person she was marrying, but I didn't. I'd spent half my life shielding her from consequences, letting her mistakes become my lessons. I sat back down at my desk, the hum of the air vent filling the silence. The city stretched out beyond the window, gray and indifferent. My phone buzzed again, a notification from Mom's account. Another post counting down the days until we officially welcome Ethan into the family. I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone face down. I used to be the one who protected her. I said quietly to the empty room. Now she'll have to learn how to protect herself. The sun dipped lower, washing the office in a dull orange light. The reflection in the window showed my face overlaid with the skyline. Tired, calm, detached. Somewhere, deep down, I knew it wouldn't end well. I also knew I wasn't going to stop it. So I shut the lights, locked the office door, and left the photo deleted. August 10th came hot and cloudless, the kind of day that made the city feel too bright, too loud. I was at a cafe off Burnside sipping an iced Americano, trying not to think about the wedding happening 600 miles south in Santa Barbara. The TV above the counter was tuned to a lifestyle network. The headline running across the bottom of the screen read, "Live coverage, the wedding of Olivia Pierce and Ethan Ward." I looked up just as the camera panned across the venue. Rose Bay Pavilion, of course. Every surface gleamed white. Rows of guests sat beneath linen canopies, fans in hand sunglasses glinting. The aisle was carpeted with roses. A small orchestra played something sweeping and expensive. Olivia appeared on screen in her custom gown, smiling so wide it almost looked painful. Ethan waited at the altar, dark suit, white boutonniere, hand resting casually in his pocket. The crowd murmured enchanted. I stirred my drink. I told myself I was calm, but when I saw them together, all I saw was a performance. The barista turned up the volume. "Can you believe this? She's gorgeous." "Yeah," I murmured. "She always knew how to play the part." The vows began. Ethan's voice, steady, charming, practiced. Olivia's trembled just enough to sound fragile. The crowd applauded. I told myself to leave, to walk out, pay for my drink, go home. But I didn't. Instead, I kept watching as they moved through the reception, the camera following them like royalty. The commentary was nauseating, modern love story, from influencer to inspiration. My phone buzzed. Jenna. A single message. "Something's happening." Another followed immediately with a link to a live stream. I tapped it. The screen stuttered, pixelated. The video shook. Someone's phone recording the reception from a table close to the dance floor. At first, everything looked perfect. Laughter, champagne, the string quartet playing in the background. Then the camera jolted as a glass shattered. The music cut. Ethan's voice rose sharp, slicing through the speakers. "Don't start this here!" Olivia's voice followed, slurred but furious. "You lied to me." She was standing beside the sweetheart table bouquet, tossed carelessly onto a chair, eyes glistening with tears that weren't the photogenic kind. The guests froze, unsure if this was some dramatic toast or an actual fight. The mic stand near the DJ picked up every sound. The ragged breath, the scrape of shoes, the low hum of whispers. Then Ethan stepped forward. His hand moved fast. The crack of the slap echoed over the PA system. Gasps filled the room. Someone screamed. A waiter dropped a tray. The camera swung wildly as guests stood up, blocking the view. All I caught was Mom's voice, shaking, horrified. "Ethan, stop." Then the feed cut to chaos, people running. Olivia clutching her cheek, Ethan yelling something I couldn't hear. The phone recording ended there mid-scream. I sat completely still. Around me, the cafe had gone silent. Even the barista stopped steaming milk. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." The TV network broke in with live footage, their anchor's voice grave now. Unconfirmed reports indicate an incident at the Ward Pierce wedding. I reached for my phone again. Jenna texted, "You saw that, right? It's everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Already 1 million views." I didn't respond. On TV, the footage replayed on a loop, censored but unmistakable. The bride flinching, the guests rushing forward. Mom in pale blue, screaming his name. The commentator called it a shocking turn at what was supposed to be the event of the season. I sipped my coffee. The ice melted into water. My heart wasn't racing. It should have been, but it wasn't. It was steady, unnervingly so. I watched the headlines roll in. Luxury wedding ends in chaos. Ethan Ward's temper explodes on camera. Pierce family silent. Amid scandal. They called it a tragedy. I called it consequence. The cafe noise returned slowly, conversations starting back up, everyone pretending not to be fascinated. I picked up my bag, dropped a few bills on the counter, and left. Outside, the heat hit like a wall. Portland shimmered in the sun, the air thick with exhaust and gossip. My phone kept buzzing. Unknown numbers, probably reporters, maybe Mom. I ignored them all. Back in my apartment, I turned on the TV again. The same clip replayed, commentators dissecting every frame. Someone had already slowed it down. Added captions measured the seconds between her slap and his. I sat on the couch, remote in hand, watching the chaos play out again and again until the repetition dulled it. Then I switched off the TV. The room fell silent. I went to my desk, opened my notebook to a blank page, and wrote slowly. It wasn't me who ruined their perfect day. They did that all on their own. The pen hovered for a moment before I closed the book. Outside, the late afternoon sun hit the glass of the building across the street, flaring into my window. I stood there watching my reflection fade into the light until all that was left was the city and the faint echo of applause that wasn't mine. 2 days later, the whole country knew her name. The sky over Portland was low and gray, the kind of weather that pressed against the windows like fogged glass. My phone screen lit the dim apartment, notifications stacked in endless rows. Santa Barbara. Wedding disaster. Trending Matyom 1. The groom who snapped Pierce family scandal. Every clip, every replay, every headline spun the same story. The fairy tale wedding turned nightmare. By noon, the video had hit 15 million views. Every outlet from TMZ to CNN had dissected the footage. Olivia's stunned face. Ethan's hand, the chaos that followed. The internet had turned it into a public autopsy. I sat at the kitchen table, phone buzzing non-stop, untouched coffee going cold beside me. The walls felt thinner than usual. Mom's voice suddenly broke the silence, her name flashing across the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Mom." "Madeline," she said, breathless, trembling. "You have to help me." The line crackled with background noise. Voices, maybe reporters outside. What's happening? "They're camped out in front of the house," she said. "News vans, photographers. They're saying we knew Ethan had anger issues and did nothing. They're accusing us of covering it up." I rubbed my temple. Why would they think that? "Because of some old post," she said quickly. "Olivia posted a picture months ago, him holding her wrist at a party. People are saying it looked aggressive. They're twisting everything." I leaned back in my chair. "You didn't seem worried when she was marrying him." Her tone sharpened. "Don't start. I need you to do something. The company's being attacked online. Clients are pulling projects. Pierce Interiors can't afford this kind of publicity. So now I'm part of the family again," I said softly, "when there's a mess to clean up." "Don't be cruel, Madeline," she snapped. "I'm asking for help. You have contacts, you know how PR works. Just release a statement, something neutral." "I'm not your spokesperson, Mom." "You're our daughter," she cried. "You think I don't regret what happened?" "Olivia's in shock, Ethan's disappeared, and people are calling me a monster." I stared at the faint reflection of my face in the black coffee, her words echoing, "Mom." I said quietly, "I wasn't even invited, remember?" There was a pause. For the first time I heard her exhale, not angry, just tired. "You're punishing us." No, I said. You're just finally facing what happens when you erase someone and expect them to still save you. She didn't answer. The call ended with static, the kind of silence that stays heavy in a room even after it's gone. Outside, rain started tapping against the window. The city looked smudged blurry. A new email popped up. Subject line, request for comment, the sister who wasn't invited. From Liam Foster, senior reporter, Pacific Herald. The message was polite professional. He wanted an interview to give voice to the other side of the story. I hovered over the reply button, then closed it. Instead, I clicked the star next to his name. Later, maybe. On social media, clips multiplied like spores. Every frame was analyzed. The color of Olivia's lipstick, the sound of Mom's scream the split second before Ethan's hand connected. Some users even slowed it down, adding captions like, "Look at her eyes here." She knew. I told myself I didn't care. Still, I found myself watching it again. The video started in noise and laughter, then chaos. I froze it on one frame. Olivia, mid-turn, Mom's hand half-raised, guests standing behind them, mouths open in synchronized shock. Their perfect tableau finally cracked. The glow of the screen washed the room in blue light. For the first time in years, I saw my family clearly, each of them trapped in their own performance, their own version of the lie. And I wasn't in the picture. The rain fell harder outside, streaking the window like ink. I whispered to the empty room. Their faces frozen in shock. And for once, I'm not in the frame. Then I turned off the phone, the screen fading to black. My reflection the only thing left staring back. By October, Portland had turned the color of rust. Leaves piled in gutters and the air smelled like wet cedar. My apartment had become a maze of papers. Bank letters, unopened envelopes, old receipts I'd been too tired to file. I was halfway through clearing the stack when the newest email arrived. Subject line, automatic payment confirmed. Family business loan. Pierce Interiors. At first I thought it was spam. Then I saw the amount due on 842 of 32s withdrawn from my checking account. And the note, loan repayment authorization ID ending in 47M, Pierce. My stomach tightened. I didn't have a business loan. I opened my banking app, scrolling through past transactions. There it was, a recurring payment stretching back 6 months. Always the same reference number, always the same deduction date. I sat there, frozen, the quiet of the apartment pressing down like a weight. When I finally stood, I went to the closet, dragged out an old storage box Mom had once asked me to keep safe. It was labeled Household Records, 2018-2021. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were neat stacks of folders, utility bills, old Pierce Interiors contracts, photocopies of driver's licenses, and at the bottom, loan agreements, signatures scrawled in blue ink. My name, my handwriting, but not mine. I flipped through page after page, the same looped M I'd used in college, the same angle of my initials, close enough to fool a bank officer. The paper smelled faintly of Mom's perfume, the one she wore to church and charity galas. I felt my pulse in my ears. I thought they'd only erased me from the family photo. Turns out they erased my ownership too. I spent the next hour scanning everything, saving PDFs, trying to keep my hands from shaking. When the screen finally filled with digital copies, I sat back and stared. 200,000 in total loans, my credit, my name. I called the only person I could think of, an attorney one of my old coworkers had mentioned months ago. Michael Hale Family Law and Business Litigation. His assistant answered. I introduced myself, explained briefly. My voice flat. I think my parents forged my signature on a loan. They booked me for the next morning. His office was in the Pearl District near the river. Minimalist calm, the kind of place that made people confess things. Michael was in his late 40s, tall, gray at the temples, with the kind of patience that comes from seeing too many family implosions. He shook my hand, studied my face like he'd already read the story there. Let's take a look. I handed him the folder. He flipped through it silently, brow furrowing deeper with each page. Finally, he said, "This isn't just messy bookkeeping. This is financial abuse, Ms. Pierce. If you don't act fast, they can continue borrowing under your name." I laughed once bitterly. They've already taken most of what mattered. Reputation's the only thing left to ruin. He looked up. You want revenge? No, I said. I want my name back. He nodded. Good. That's cleaner to fight for. While he made copies, I stepped to the window. The rain had started again, tracing soft lines down the glass. My phone buzzed. An email from my old firm. The subject line read, regarding the downtown redevelopment project. My heart lifted for a second before I opened it. Thank you for your submission, but the client has decided to go with a younger design team to better match their rebranding direction. I stared at the sentence until it blurred. Younger, fresher, more dynamic. The irony hit hard. Funny how they fear age but never notice growth. Michael returned, setting the file gently on the table. There's something else. He pointed to a page marked in red. The loan isn't just in your name. There's a co-owner listed. Who I asked, Olivia. The sound of her name was like a slap. My sister, she's tied to the business. He nodded. Legally, yes. According to this document, she's a partial owner of Pierce Interiors, and this loan uses your credit as collateral. Your mother signed as guarantor. I felt something inside me tilt. She forged my signature. Looks that way. I sat down again. The air in the room seemed thinner. Can we prove it? Michael met my eyes, easily, but once you start this, there's no going back. They'll have to answer for it publicly. I took the papers from him. The ink felt heavier than it should. They already made it public, I said. They just forgot to tell me. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then let's make it official. When I left his office, the rain had stopped. The streets were slick with light, and my reflection followed me across the glass storefronts. Steadier, colder, a little sharper. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt written in bold. Snow had already covered most of Bend by the time I pulled into Helen's driveway. The trees were white to their branches, the air sharp with that clean metallic cold that made everything sound quieter. I hadn't been there in years, not since before the wedding, before everything. A thin column of smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, the little wooden house smelled like cinnamon and strong coffee. My aunt was at the stove stirring something in a chipped blue pot. When she saw me, she smiled the same soft, steady smile she'd always had. The kind that didn't need words to mean you're safe here. I'm glad you came, sweetheart, she said. Sit down, warm up. I slipped off my gloves, flexing my fingers near the wood stove. You sounded serious on the phone. She nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I found something. You should see it. From a cabinet near the hallway, she pulled out a small metal box. Old fireproof with a tiny lock that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. She set it on the kitchen table between us. It's from your father, she said quietly. He left it with me before things got bad. Told me to give it to you when I thought you were ready. I stared at the box, my breath catching for a second. What is it? Helen sat across from me. Why don't you open it and find out? The lock clicked open with a metallic sigh. Inside was a folded letter, a small flash drive, and your typical bank envelope yellowed at the edges. I unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was unmistakably Dad's. Strong at the start, shakier near the end. Maddie, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say what needed to be said. You were the one who kept this family standing. The rest of us only kept the name. I saw what your mother did. The accounts, the lies. I didn't stop it, and that's on me. There's a video file on the drive. It's not much, but I want you to know I tried to make it right. There's a bank record, too. It's yours, not theirs. Use it to build something better than we did. I'm sorry for all the ways I failed you. My eyes blurred before I reached the end, not from grief exactly, but from the strange relief of finally hearing the truth, even too late. Helen watched me quietly, her hands folded. He knew more than he ever let on. I looked up at her. Did you know about any of this? She hesitated. Bits and pieces. Your mother and I stopped speaking years ago after she pushed me out of your grandfather's will. Said I was too sentimental to handle money. Maybe that's true. Her eyes softened. But I know this family's pattern, Maddie. It repeats. One woman gets erased so another can stay shining. I knotted my throat tight. And I was next in line. She reached across the table, touching my hand. You can break it, you know. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The screen flickered. Then a video opened. Grainy footage of Dad, sitting in his old study, the lamp behind him flickering. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. Hey, kid, he said, trying to smile. If you're watching this, I guess I ran out of time. I don't have excuses. I just want you to know I saw you. All the times you carried the load, fixed what wasn't yours to fix. You were the one holding the house together, while the rest of us were busy pretending it was fine. Your mother. She loves differently. For her, love is control. For me, it was avoidance. Neither of us did right by you. If you found this, do what I couldn't. Stand up to it. He paused, rubbing his temple. I never thought I'd leave you with a mess like this. But I know you'll clean it up, not because you have to, but because you'll finally choose to. The video ended on his sigh, a faint smile ghosting over his face before the screen went black. I sat there, the silence of the room pressing heavy against my chest. The fire crackled. Outside, snow kept falling. Helen poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one toward me. He recorded that 6 months before he passed. He wanted you to find it when you were ready to stop forgiving everyone. I traced the rim of the cup. He sounds like he finally understood. He did, she said, but understanding doesn't fix damage, only action does. I looked at her. If you were me, would you sue them? She leaned back, thinking for a moment. If you don't, they'll keep teaching the next generation that love means silence. You know that better than anyone. I stared at the fire. The light flickered across the letter, the handwriting slowly curling at the edges from the warmth. I'm not doing this for money, I said quietly. Helen smiled. Good. Then you'll do it right. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the box, and closed the lid. The sound of the latch clicking felt final, like a door shutting behind me. When I looked up again, the snow outside had stopped. The sky was still gray, but there was light breaking through, a thin line of gold across the horizon. I took a deep breath, feeling it settle somewhere steadier inside me. For the first time, the word justice didn't sound like anger. It sounded like balance. I stood, pulling on my coat. Thank you, Aunt Helen. She nodded. Go get your name back, Maddie. As I stepped outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks sharp and clean. My car was dusted with snow. I brushed it off with my sleeve, slid behind the wheel, and looked once more at the little wooden house in the rearview mirror. Warm, steady, waiting. When I turned the ignition, the engine hummed low. I reached into my coat pocket, touched the cool edge of the metal box, and whispered, This time, I won't stay quiet. Then I drove toward the highway. The world around me, white and new. The kind of silence that felt less like absence, and more like a beginning. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, the kind of place where truth felt heavy before it was even spoken. January air bit at my cheeks as I walked up the steps, coat buttoned to my neck, the gray sky hanging low over Portland. Reporters waited outside like vultures, microphones raised, their voices echoing, Ms. Pierce, is it true? You're suing your own mother. Did Olivia know about the forgery? I didn't answer. My attorney, Michael Hale, walked beside me, his stride even and calm. The marble floor inside gleamed under the fluorescent lights. They called it a scandal. I called it the truth being unlocked. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Rows of benches filled with curious faces, some press, some strangers who'd been following the story since the wedding. At the front, the Oregon state seal hung behind the judge's bench, a reminder that this wasn't family therapy. It was law. Marianne sat at the defense table in a navy suit, pearls at her throat like armor. Olivia sat beside her, pale hair pulled tight, eyes fixed on the table. Neither looked at me. When the clerk announced Pierce versus Pierce, case number 24, 1769, the room went silent, except for the scratch of pens. Michael stood. Your Honor, this case isn't about resentment. It's about accountability. 8 years of financial manipulation under the guise of family support. He laid out the evidence wire transfers from my accounts to theirs, forged signatures, and a digital recording retrieved from the USB my father had left. The judge adjusted her glasses. Please play the recording. Michael pressed play. Through the speakers, my mother's voice echoed across the courtroom. Calm, dismissive, unmistakable. If Madeline finds out, we'll just tell her it was a misunderstanding. She won't fight us. She never does. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cameras clicked, despite the bailiff's warning. Marianne's hand tightened around her purse strap. Olivia's shoulders curled inward like she was bracing for impact. I didn't look at them. When the recording ended, Michael turned back to the judge. This isn't speculation. It's premeditated fraud. My client's trust was used as collateral. The defense attorney, a polished man with silver cufflinks, stood smoothly. Your Honor. This is a tragic family misunderstanding. Mrs. Pierce acted out of love, not greed. Surely we're not criminalizing poor communication. The judge's expression didn't change. "Proceed." He turned toward me. "Ms. Pierce, may I ask, why bring this to court? Is it money you seek from your own mother?" I met his gaze. "No, it's dignity. The thing she took when she taught me silence was loyalty." He hesitated, thrown off balance. "So you're saying this isn't revenge?" "I'm saying this is the only language they ever listened to." Murmurs filled the room. Michael gave me a slight nod, steady approving. He called me to the stand. The wood of the railing was cool under my palms as I took my oath. My voice didn't shake. "I never wanted to be here," I said, "but I spent my whole life fixing other people's mistakes, cleaning up their chaos because it was called love. All I'm doing now is refusing to let that cycle keep going." The judge listened without interruption, pen still. When the defense tried again, Mom finally spoke. Her voice cracked, but not from guilt. "Madeline, you're making a spectacle of us." I looked at her calm. "No, Mom. You already did that. I'm just cleaning the reflection." Her eyes filled, but she looked away before the tears could fall. Olivia reached for her hand. Marianne didn't take it. Michael resumed presenting the last piece of evidence, a notarized bank statement proving the $200,000 loan had been secured using my name, with Olivia listed as co-owner. The judge's tone sharpened. "Mrs. Pierce, did you forge your daughter's signature?" Marianne's lips parted, searching for air. I thought she'd understand. "We were drowning, so you helped yourselves to her name," the judge asked. Marianne whispered, "She always helps." Silence. The gavel's shadow fell long across the table. When the recess bell finally rang, I sat back, drained but steady. Through the window behind the bench, snow had started falling soft and relentless. After deliberation, the judge returned with the verdict. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Restitution in the amount of $100,000 is ordered along with the transfer of property located in Bend, Oregon to Ms. Pierce. Case closed." The words landed like the slow, measured beat of a heart finally at rest. Michael exhaled. I stood, hands still, not triumphant, just free. Behind me, Marianne collapsed into her seat, shoulders shaking. Olivia covered her face, whispering through her fingers. I turned once, just enough to meet my mother's eyes. For the first time, there was no guilt in me, only distance. Outside, flashes exploded as we stepped through the courthouse doors. Reporters shouted questions I couldn't hear. The air was cold, clean, full of something like quiet. Snow drifted through the light. They used to say silence was my weakness, but this time, silence belonged to me. I walked down the steps, the crunch of snow beneath my boots leaving their noise behind me. A month after the verdict, spring began to edge its way into Portland. Slow gray and reluctant. The air still smelled like rain, but there were hints of something softer underneath, like the city was learning to breathe again. Every morning my phone filled with headlines I didn't ask for. Ethan Ward charged with misdemeanor assault. Ward PR declares bankruptcy amid scandal. Influencer Olivia Pierce loses brand deals following viral wedding fallout. The photos were everywhere. His face blurred, leaving the courthouse, her smile from the engagement shoot repurposed for sympathy clicks. The same magazines that once called them America's power couple now labeled them a cautionary tale. I scrolled without emotion. It wasn't satisfaction. It was clarity. On the TV, Marianne appeared on a talk show sitting beside a lawyer I didn't recognize. She wore a dark dress hair, perfectly set, voice calm and deliberate. "The media has twisted our story," she said. "My family has always acted out of love. Mistakes were made, but we are not criminals." The chyron below read, "Exclusive, Marianne Pierce breaks her silence." For the first time she looked smaller on camera. Not older, just smaller, like the frame couldn't hold the weight of her version anymore. Meanwhile, online a different story was spreading. Liam Foster's article, "The Daughter They Erased," hit the front page of the Pacific Herald. The feature photo was black and white. Me leaving the courthouse steps, snow still falling. The headline read, "The Woman Who Stayed Silent Until Justice Spoke for Her." I didn't ask for it. But reading it, I didn't mind. He wrote about how financial abuse often hides behind family dinners and polite smiles. How silence becomes survival until it's mistaken for consent. He ended the piece simply. Her victory wasn't in court. It was in remembering her own name. Justice isn't about winning. It's when you no longer have to explain yourself. I closed the laptop and looked around my apartment. Plants by the window files stacked neatly. The hum of quiet that finally sounded like peace. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of a small mirror, adjusting the microphone clipped to my jacket. The banner behind me read, Financial Abuse Awareness Forum, Portland Women's Center. The hall was modest, rows of folding chairs. The smell of coffee, murmurs of people settling in. Around 50 attendees filled the space, college students, retirees, mothers with tired eyes. Some looked curious. Some looked like they already knew too much. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium. The microphone squeaked once, then settled. My name is Madeline Pierce. I began. For years I thought helping meant giving, time, money, forgiveness, until I had nothing left to give. I learned the hard way that love without respect isn't love. It's permission. The room was still. I told them about the bank papers, the forged signatures, the long years of explaining away what shouldn't have been excused. I didn't name my family. I didn't have to. Everyone there knew their own version of mine. Halfway through, a woman in the second row covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. Another reached for her hand. I kept going. I thought being silent made me good. It didn't. It just made me invisible. When I finished, there was no applause, just a long quiet before people began to stand. A few came forward, one of them a middle-aged woman in a faded green coat, eyes rimmed red. She reached for my hand. Thank you, she said softly. I thought I was the only one. Her fingers were cold but steady. I squeezed back. You're not... She smiled through her tears, and I realized it was the first genuine smile I'd given anyone in months. Later that evening, I stopped by a newsstand downtown. The air was damp, the smell of print ink mixing with rain. On the rack, a new issue of the Herald caught my eye. Liam had published a follow-up from Silence to Strength. I bought a copy, unfolded it carefully on the tram ride home. The first paragraph quoted something I'd said during the forum. The loudest kind of courage is often quiet. I read it twice, then folded the paper and tucked it under my arm. Not pride, not triumph, just something gentler. Peace. I realized doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits beside you quietly, waiting for you to notice. Outside, the tram glided past the Willamette River, reflecting the last pale light of day. My reflection in the window looked different, still me but lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone erased from the picture. I felt like the one who finally stepped out of it. Spring came late to Bend that year. The mountains still wore streaks of snow, but the air smelled like thawing pine and fresh paint. The house my father once built had been reborn. New walls, open windows, laughter where silence used to live. We called it the Haven Studio, a small art and recovery space for women rebuilding their lives. Some painted, some just came to sit with the sound of brushes moving across canvas. Every day felt a little quieter, a little more whole. That morning I was in the kitchen, grinding coffee beans, the low hum of conversation from the workshop in the next room drifting through. The scent of acrylic paint mixed with the bitter warmth of espresso. I'd just poured a cup when I heard a knock on the door. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it. Olivia stood on the porch. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, paler, but her eyes were steady. She wore a denim jacket and carried a small wooden box, edges worn smooth. The spring drizzle clung to her hair, turning the strands a darker gold. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, tentative. Hi, Maddie. Hey. I said, my voice softer than I expected. You look... better. I am, she said. Mostly. I stepped aside, motioning her in. The warmth of the studio wrapped around us as she entered. She looked around slowly, at the canvases lining the walls, the work tables covered in brushes and sketch pads, the women painting quietly near the windows. It's beautiful, she said. I've been coming here the past few weeks. Not to this location. One of the other centers. It helps. I blinked. You've been part of the program? She nodded. Yeah. I had to, Maddie. After everything. After him. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the box down on the counter. I finished rehab 6 months ago. The kids are with Mom right now, but they're doing okay. I found work at a community center in Salem. That's good, I said carefully. It sounds like you're finally standing on your own. A faint smile crossed her face. For the first time, maybe. The rain outside had softened into mist. She brushed a drop from her cheek and tapped the lid of the box. I brought you something. I looked at it. What is it? She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, wrapped in a folded handkerchief, was a watch. My father's watch. The same one he'd worn every day of my childhood, ticking softly, even during his silences. I found it when Mom moved. Olivia said quietly, "She said Dad wanted you to have it." I think she finally understood why. The watch face caught the light from the window, scratched but still running. I picked it up, feeling the faint vibration of the second hand against my palm. "It still works," I whispered. "Yeah," her voice trembled. "Some things survive even after everything else breaks." I looked up at her. She wasn't the same woman from the wedding videos or the tabloids. There was no makeup hiding her exhaustion, no defensiveness in her posture, just honesty, and a kind of regret that didn't need words. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything I let happen, for the things I pretended not to see." My throat tightened, but the anger I expected never came. Only something quieter, like relief. "I know," I said, "and I believe you." Her eyes glistened. "You don't have to forgive me. I already did," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." We stood there for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, hesitating before wrapping her arms around me. Her body was trembling, but the embrace was real. Awkward, desperate, and warm. The studio door creaked open behind us, letting in a cool draft. One of the women peeked in, then smiled softly, and closed it again. Outside, the drizzle thickened into a light spring rain, tapping gently on the windows. Olivia pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I should go. I promised the kids I'd be back before dinner." I nodded. "You know where to find me." She smiled, a small, uncertain smile, but it was enough. "Yeah, I do." She picked up her bag and walked to the door. Before stepping out, she turned once more. "He'd be proud of you, you know." I glanced at the watch in my hand. Maybe. Or maybe he'd just be relieved someone finally stopped fixing everything for everyone else. She gave a faint laugh, the first real one I'd heard from her in years, then stepped into the rain. I watched her cross the gravel path toward her car, the drizzle catching the light like threads of silver around her. For the first time, she didn't look fragile. She looked free. When her car disappeared down the road, I stood on the porch, the watch ticking softly in my palm. Karma isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in a trembling voice and a late apology. The rain eased to a mist, the air smelling of earth and pine. I looked out toward the mountains, then back at the studio windows glowing warm behind me. And for the first time as my sister's car faded into the distance, I didn't feel the urge to hold her back. I just whispered to the quiet air. For once, she's walking away, and I don't need to follow. The watch ticked steadily, keeping time with the sound of the rain. Winter settled over Bend like a soft hush. The days were short now, the air silver and cold, and the lights from downtown flickered faintly across the valley. From the window of my studio, I could see the faint blur of the Cascade Mountains under the clouds, half hidden by the breath of the season. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and cedar. I stood at the window, the reflection of the lamps behind me floating on the glass. Soft, steady, and whole. It had been almost 2 years since the trial. 2 years since the chaos had burned itself out and left behind something quieter. Something that looked a lot like peace. Outside students from the Haven studio were packing up for the holidays. Laughter carried faintly through the snow. I watched as one of them turned back to wave before heading down the path, her footprints already filling in with white. I'd learned to love the sound of quiet footsteps leaving. In Portland, the lights from the city shimmered through the fog on the evening news. Olivia's name appeared briefly on the ticker Community Volunteer, and single mother of 2 helps organize winter fundraiser. The photo showed her and the kids in aprons, flour on their cheeks, a tray of cookies in their hands. I smiled. Somewhere else in a backyard just outside Eugene, Marianne knelt beside Helen, pruning frost-bitten roses. Helen's garden had always been small but stubborn, growing back every spring no matter how cold the winter before. My mother still looked uncomfortable with dirt under her nails, but she was there. That was enough. The hum of my laptop pulled me back to the present. A new email notification blinked on the screen. Michael Hale. Just read your interview in the Herald. Beautifully said. You turned survival into art. Proud of you. I leaned back, reading it twice before closing the message. On the corner of the desk sat a copy of Liam's new book, The Cost of Silence. My name wasn't on the cover, but the quote beneath the title was mine. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to outlast the noise. The words looked different in print than they had when I first said them. Back then, they'd come from exhaustion. Now they felt like a promise kept. They once erased me from the list. But because of that, I found my place in the world. I opened a new document on my laptop. The cursor blinked against the blank screen waiting. I typed slowly, each word deliberate. Pierce Foundation, empowering women to reclaim their voices. I stared at the line for a long time, then hit save. The light from the window dimmed as the day gave up the last of its color. I turned off the lamp, letting the twilight fill the room. On the wall beside the desk hung a single photo, a print from years ago, back when the four of us still fit into one frame. Mom's smile looked rehearsed. Dad's arm was around us both, proud. Tired, Olivia's hand clutched mine, her eyes full of something between admiration and fear. And there I was, half hidden, half forgotten, smiling just enough to blend in. A gust of wind slipped through the chimney, rattling the edges of the frame. It fell before I could catch it, landing against the hardwood with a sharp crack. The glass splintered diagonally across the photo, a perfect fracture between what was and what would never be again. I knelt, lifting it gently. The crack had sliced through the middle of the picture, leaving my face untouched. I set the photo aside on the shelf, and beside it placed another frame, a newer one. Just me this time. The first portrait taken for the Foundation's opening campaign. No gloss, no performance. Just a woman looking forward. The watch my father left me ticked faintly on the desk, its rhythm steady against the hush of the house. I stood there a long while, the city lights blinking faintly in the distance, my reflection fading into the window as night came down. Their faces were frozen in shock, and for once, I wasn't one of them. The furnace clicked on, filling the silence with warmth. I took one last look at the window, at the faint outline of the mountains wrapped in mist, and smiled. If you've ever been written out of your own story, remember this: sometimes silence is the most powerful answer you can give. Because when the noise fades, what's left is what's real. And what's real is you.